Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Freeformers Unplugged, the live stream slash podcast where we unplug, which we don't because we're literally plugged into power and the internet, and talk about all things product design, human-centered design, HR, L&D, and the intersectionality of designing customer experience for employee experience. We're changing up the format slightly. Myself and Emily have decided that we're going to interview each other on topics. And so this is the first time we're trying it out. So let us know how it goes, what you think. But we both bring very different expertise to what we do here at Freeformers, and it allows us to do a bit of a deep dive into that expertise. So good afternoon, Emily. How you doing?
Hello, hello. Very good. The sun is shining, and everybody I've spoken to this week has just been so happy because of that. So therefore, I'm very
Apart,
happy. Apart from you,
apart
but
from
I'm not
me,
really counting you. You, Mr.
hang,
Grump in the corner. Everything is rubbish.
hangover-induced misery. Nothing to do with the weather. The weather is lovely. Just very tired, and I'm very glad it's the end of the week. So there we go. If anything articulated our relationship in terms of running a business, I think we are chalk and cheese. Out of chalk and cheese, which one would you rather be?
Chalk.
Oh, good, because I'd rather be cheese. Fantastic. It all works. Okay, so this week we are talking about human-centered design and really why user insight and interviews are just such an important part of that process. I think what we have done over the past couple of years is look at how we expedite that process. How do we make it easier and simpler, not only for us as people delivering services, but also enabling and empowering our clients to do it? Because quite bluntly, we don't want to sit inside organizations helping them do this stuff. We want to empower them so they can do it themselves. And so I think the first question is, I suppose for you, Emily, is when we look at the human-centered design process, it starts with discovery. Why?
Why do we start with discovery? Well, I think the first thing is, even before discovery, I would say it actually starts with kind of like an orientation of understanding the basic brief or area that you're looking at. You need to have some idea of where you're starting before you go off into any sort of discovery, because otherwise you're going to be all over the place. You're not going to be targeted or strategic. You're going to find out so many things and be too overwhelmed, not know what to do with them.
Mhm.
So there has to be some kind of use case that you're focusing on. So that's really the first step. But then why do we do discovery after that? Well, if you take anything away from this session, it's that you are not your user. Okay. And what you think you know and how you feel is not necessarily the same as how your user feels. There might be some times where there is some crossover. You might use your own product. You might be a specific type of user for your product, but you are not your user. You care about different things. For a start, you care if people use your product, and the people who are using it, they really don't care. And when I say product, it could be product or service. It could be anything like your learning solution, or it could be your marketing campaign, or whatever the call to action is from your marketing campaign. It doesn't have to be a product in the traditional sense,
Mm.
but you will hear me talk through this podcast about product, because I find that it helps me refine the thing that I'm trying to deliver, even if it's more like a service or a more traditional HR offering.
And that's really interesting, actually, because when you frame it like that, if you were to apply, that human-centered design process to customer stuff, ultimately you have to, because if it isn't customer centric, if it isn't built on the needs of a customer, then you're not going to make money and your business won't thrive. But when it comes to employees, I talk about the captive market problem, right? Is that doesn't really have a fundamental impact on the employee. No, it has a massive impact on the employee experience, but the perceived impact is like it doesn't have a tangible impact on how successful the business is because no one's ever expressed it that way. If you deliver a substandard employee experience, what happens? People don't stay as long. People don't join your organization. People have a drop in performance, but no one's ever really quantified that in terms of the actual money it's costing the organization. Yes, we can get like those statistics that people say, like, oh, every time you lose someone, it costs £30,000 or whatever to rehire them. You'll have way more research on that than I do, Emily. But like, it doesn't mean how much does it actually cost our business, rather than coming up with these like formulas which are based on this set of data we have and this set of data which we're just going to get from like an industry benchmark. You have that information already. Work it out. Anyway, we're not here to talk about measurement and data. So when we go into this world of human-centered design and we want to learn more about our end user, what kind of things are we doing to find that out? Because I imagine we're just sending out lots of surveys, right?
No, and it's not. You're just saying it there to get a reaction from me. No, so surveys have their place. So if we come to the world of data, we have quantitative data and we have qualitative data, also known as quant and qual, imaginatively named. Quantitative, it is about quantity. So they are, when you ask, you get kind of numbered data. You get people ask you ask very close questions, and you get high volumes of it. It tells you what's happening in your business, and this is what we get from surveys. If you're lucky, it tells you what's happening with your business and you've worded it well. Or it could be things like behavioral data points. That's all quant data as well. So if you want to look at engagement rates of, say, Microsoft Teams or Slack or whatever you're using, who posts what in what channels, how upkeep adoption of like ChatGPT or another AI, that's all quant data. And then qualitative data, we really get into people's opinions. Easy ways to get qualitative data are through either interviews or focus groups. And qualitative data really has its place because you can really dig into something and you can find out why something is happening. So quant data can say you have X users use this, let's say ChatGPT, because I was looking at our numbers and so it's top of my head. Users are using, this is how many messages they do per month, but it doesn't tell you anything about why they're using it, what they're using it for, how important it is to their daily routines. Any of that stuff isn't found out through a survey. Or if you did try and ask a question about every single thing, your survey will get so bloated and you get user fatigue, meaning that people will get pissed off and close your survey or go to or just try and game it. You're not going to get useful data. Whereas qualitative data, qual, when you can have those kind of interviews, you can really dig into. So tell me about your usage of ChatGPT. And they'll start off, oh, I use it to do this and this. And then you pick on something that's really interesting. And then you can answer lots of different questions through a user just talking for a minute or so about how they use ChatGPT. And it's so much more insightful. And quant is then useful off the back of qual, because if you found out this is how users are using ChatGPT, but you obviously can't interview everybody, right? And that's not the point of qual. You're not meant to go and interview every single person in an organization. But then you can use survey data to say, okay, so these people said this. Let's find out how relevant this is at scale through a survey or whatever alternative quant data sources you're using to find out if that's actually true for a wider population.
So why are there loads of platforms and companies that are selling survey type services to organizations to get the quantitative data, but there are very, very few platforms and services doing it for qualitative stuff?
So I think you highlighted this at the beginning, really, that it is kind of seen as big and hard and not as important. It's not a strategic priority for a lot of people. They think it's really expensive and they don't necessarily understand the benefit of doing something, and they're not prepared to invest the money into something that is entirely internal facing because, like you said, it's a captive market. Like we almost take our employees for granted sometimes. We're just like, oh, we'll just chuck them some benefits and some training and development. Cool. And they're here and they'll like it. And if they leave, no big deal. But we'll never talk to them again, but it's no big deal. I feel like I'm paraphrasing and over exaggerating slightly, but the point still stands. So quantitative surveys in particular are seen as really easy ways to get data because they're cheap, because you can reach a really wide group of people very, very quickly. So you've got representation across the whole population. So let's say your organization. However, I would say but we know that people don't expect high responses from survey results. So we already know that data is not going to be great, right? Because the people who engage with a survey, they're either really passionately really care, they've been nagged enough times, and so they're just like, just get off my case, and so they're already frustrated and they come to it from a negative point of view, or they have a gripe, right? And it's the same with many other quant sources. So let's say like or many other sources. In fact, if we say like Glassdoor, for example, or ratings and reviews of businesses, you tend to get this kind of split, right? You get the people who are really keen and the people who have a real problem. But the answer to your question, people think it's quicker and easier. They're thinking about it from the opposite of a human-centered design approach. They're thinking about it from their own perspective. It's quicker and easier for me, so I'm going to do it. Qual, it's expensive, and I don't understand the benefits.
Interesting. And so, well, I think the thing I reflect on there, and I think I've told you before, is if I look at the last job I had, when I did the discovery part of human centered design, or the discovery and definition part, is that cost around £30,000 for the client to do, which is incredibly expensive. And you know what? It took weeks. And when I think about that, yes, the output was superb and great and useful and all this kind of stuff, but it was like, that was for a very large organization. If you are anything smaller than that organization, two things: you simply will not have the budget to attribute to that. You also won't have the time. You also then probably are really going to struggle to even provide a good business case of why you would
Yeah.
do it anyway. So therefore, you would defer to surveys. I think it comes to the point that we've just talked about before about most of the work that L&D, HR, and people teams do is, well, there's two things, isn't there? Validate their own existence is a phrase I use a lot. That's what the work is there to try and do that. But I think the other one is it comes from a business centric view. Most of the stuff that is
Yeah.
designed to deliver by that as a function is business centric. The business needs to be compliant in this area. It needs this policy. It needs this handbook. It needs to be seen that it's done training in this area. And therefore, that's all because the business needs it. The business needs it. The business needs it. And you have to truly believe that sometimes there is this Venn diagram of what the business needs and what your people need. And in the middle is the sweet spot. If you can do that stuff, that's probably the stuff that's going to have the most impact. I'm not saying stop doing all the stuff the business needs. And I'm not saying exclusively design stuff for what people need, because generally that's two opposing forces. But this sweet spot in the middle is probably where your time, resource, and effort should be spent. And so you talk about kind of user research. What kind of things should someone be doing then? So if you kind of go, right, I've done a survey and I've got all this information, it's not really telling me, I don't really know, like, and this is the typical thing with any survey platform, right? Is like most survey companies out there will deploy a very fancy tool with some very nice analytics out the back of it. And then it's the phrase that you use a lot, so what?
Yeah.
That's the difficult bit. And I have never met a platform company that does that knows the so what, because it's like, well, we've given you the data, you're the experts in people, you do the so what bit, and the action falls into this chasm, or it just gets passed on to your middle management, and they kind of go, well, I don't know what to do with it either. So what discovery should someone be doing in addition to some of that kind of quantitative work?
If you want to have more of an idea of things you can actually do to make a tangible impact in the behavior that you want to change, then you have to know how you're going to go about doing it, right? I mean, it sounds obvious. So when you get that survey data coming out, the reason why you don't know what to do with it, even if you can kind of prioritize it, is the answers are very flat. They haven't given you any context, any nuance, and you don't understand the context in which you're trying to operate, in which you're trying to change behavior, usually anyway. And that's what interviews can really give you. They can give you a really good place to start trying to make changes. So, for example, say you've talked to quite a few people in your organization, and some things I always say you should try and ask is I'll try and get to the bottom of. It's slightly different from asking them outright. It's understanding what their motivation is. So understanding, why they're here, what really drives them. For a lot of people, it's helping others, or problem solving, or reputation and recognition, which sometimes translates to money, sometimes translates to prestige. And then obviously in different organizations, you're going to have different flavors of that depending on what the purpose of the organization is. But generally, we always tend to get those and then potentially some others as well. Once you understand people's motivations as just one small part, whatever you design, it's got to tap into that motivation. So if you want them to change your behavior, any messaging you put out has to connect the change in behavior to the motivation that they want to see. So, for example, and I'm really sticking on one very, very small point or very small part of a user interview here, but we are doing some work at the moment. We are we're doing an influencer campaign within an organization to try and get them to, it's kind of a mix between product knowledge as a behavior change, so understanding a new system and actually using it. Now, for the people for whom problem solving is the is really their motivation, our influencers have to speak to that problem solving bit. They have to say, this is what the impact that you're going to have on clients. And this is how you will have, it's an environmental organization. So this is the tangible impact that you are going to have on the environment through your problem solving, etc., etc. And really, really make that messaging very, very concrete to that audience. And because we've got, let's say, 5 or 6 different motivations, we can have a different strand of messaging that explains why this thing that we care about and why we want you to do and why it's important, but how it's going to affect you. Because ultimately, users, learners, employees, whoever they are not going to use something unless they see the benefit for them.
And that's the really interesting thing about that project specifically, is that, having done this style of project a few times now, one of the worst versions of that project that was delivered many years ago was, we elected people to be, you will be involved, you'll be involved, you'll be involved, and you'll be involved.
Mm-hmm.
And both the continual engagement with them and that project was really low, and the
Yep.
output was poor. Whereas when we've done what you've described, and that this is our default positioning now, and we tell all of our clients this, is that don't do that. That's the worst thing you could do. And now, we've gone from a space where they're like, oh, we're kind of worried that we won't get anybody put their hand up. And now we've got exactly the right number of people that we need for that project. And even people coming out of the woodwork going, oh, I heard you were doing this. I'd love to be involved.
Yep.
Because we've
Yep.
designed the messaging and the program to attract the right people.
Yep.
And therefore, what we know is now that the engagement and all that kind of stuff will be a lot higher because they want to do. They want to do it. It seems so simple, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But you can't assume someone's motivation. You can assume it, but you may well be wrong. And this is when discovery really will help you tap into that and test it. Motivation is just one small part of what you want to discover. The gold is really in understanding the pain points and the frustrations. Because whilst you can maximize motivation, you can tap into someone's motivation. If you can remove those pain points, that is what's going to actually have a tangible impact on whatever it is you're doing. So there's no nice way, because you can't ask somebody, hey, what's your pain points? You have to really dig into and really get to the basis, to the bottom of those frustrations to make any meaningful change.
So you've mentioned interviews quite a lot there. Why wouldn't you use something like a focus group?
So we can, and we do use focus groups periodically. Personally, I find that they are harder to run. They actually end up taking more time. It's kind of like a false narrative that they are quicker, and also I think the insight that you get out of them is not as valid. So let me start with why I think that they're harder, because they take longer to organize, particularly if you've got a specific group of people. You need to make sure everyone's available. You need to think, are you doing something in person versus are you doing something online? And that does have quite a difference. It depends on the organization. If you're an organization that's very used to remote conversations, it can be okay. But if you're in person, then you need to do it in person. And so I find that it ends up taking a bit longer, all in all, with all the everything you've got to sort out. Then the other thing, and this is the bigger one, because I'm not opposed to hard work. The bigger problem I find is that you end up with groupthink. You have different personalities. It's the same as whenever you do any sort of training or facilitation or run a meeting. You have people who are really confident and loud in their opinions. It doesn't mean their opinions are any more valid than anybody else's opinions. And as soon as somebody voices something, we all have a natural phenomenon. We don't want to stand out from the crowd. It comes back from, when we were animals, and you don't want to be the one that the group turns on. You don't want to single yourself out unless you are the alpha male, because you don't want everyone staring at you because they might attack you and kill you. I don't think that's going to happen in a meeting or a focus group. However, it's very hard to be a dissenting voice. So a lot of real insight will get lost.
And generally, in like a customer world, focus groups are used when you're actually like putting a product or a film in front
Yeah,
of or a TV show in front of people. You're using those at the moment where you've probably got close enough to a product that you want to test, rather than hey, what product should we design?
Yeah, so that's like a usability or a feasibility, yeah, usability research, I suppose, or usability tests when you've got something and you want to see how people use it. And then focus groups are, depending on the product or project, can be completely recognizable. But there you're not really looking for original insights. You're more looking for behavioral data. I think if it's very much attitudinal data, it still can very much get muddied when you have a group of people because they tend to follow similar paths.
So we're going to do interviews. We, as part of all of this, we've got to this point and go, right, we need to interview some people. How many people should I interview, Emily?
I mean, how long's a piece of string, right? Um, I mean, genuinely, just start doing something. Well, have an idea. Have an idea of what it is that you want to find out, kind of like your this is my main question, my topic I want to find out about. In academia, we'd call it a research question, but like, just what do I want to know? And start from there and then think, who do I need to interview, like what kind of person? Because if you have lots of different subgroups, that's when your quantity will need to increase. So if you want to interview lots of different people from like different offices, or different branches or different teams, you've introduced what we call a variable, so something that's different about these people. So you'd need to make sure that you have enough people from each variable, in order to make any sort of meaningful understanding. There are whole like blogs, sites, so many resources about how many people you need to interview. And there is like some statistical formulas you can do. But honestly, in this case, I'd say you need to have a 4 to 5 for kind of each main variable that is really important to your to your discovery process. Um, so we tend to say minimum of 12. Maximum that we've done at Freeformers has actually been 30. If you, and the reason why, if you have so many, you'll end up with semantic saturation, right? As in, people will keep saying the same stuff over and over and over again. Qual isn't about scaling and reaching everybody. It's about getting a representative sample of people so that you hear certainly the main things repeatedly, but not to the extent that you're just kind of not wasting your time, but you get kind of diminishing returns from it. So if you were going to start, I'd probably try and start with like 12 or so. That's a reasonable amount, but it depends on your context.
Hmm. Interesting. The thing I'm thinking about is when we did the 30, because there were in that there was like janitorial staff, kitchen staff, front of house staff, people providing care. Like there were quite a lot of variables in the whilst all these people were operating the same four walls or the same building,
Hmm.
they were doing very, very, very different jobs. So that's interesting because it's not an environment, like you say, it's a variable rather than an environmental factor. It's not we need to interview one person for every one of the buildings that this client operates. Actually, that's not the important thing here, or not the
Yeah.
most important thing. The variable is the working environment in which they're in. Um, so okay, we're going to go out and we're going to interview, let's say, 12 people,
Hmm.
and
I mean, 12
where
is just an arbitrary number. Don't just zoom in on 12, but yes.
well, but let's just say I'm spinning up a human-centered design project. I've convinced everyone that going and doing some interviews in addition to the survey is really important. Now I
Hmm.
need to define, okay, like how am I going to find these people? And then when I have found them, what am I going to ask them?
Yeah, sure. So finding people is the side of it. I think one thing you've got to be cautious of is the opportunity trap. So opportunity data is whenever you ask people who just you happen across, normally because they're in close proximity to you, either virtually or next to you physically. So by that I mean your friends, people you know, connections on LinkedIn, or the team that sits in your immediate vicinity, say any of that sort of thing, you're going to get a very biased sample. Ideally, you really want to be talking to people who are not the keen users, who are kind of the frustrated ones, because that is where the real gold is. Sometimes that is easier to do as an outsider. So something we often find with clients, particularly if they try to do something similar, it's easier if you're further removed from it. And being an external, being a third party is really, really helpful, because people are like, right, this is my chance to actually to say something that's because people get survey fatigue, like I said. They think nothing's going to change because historically nobody has proved that anything is going to change as a result of survey. Because even if people do change things, they're very bad at communicating it. So you want to probably go direct to some people, or direct to managers, or people who have kind of that social capital, and get them to ask some people. We're not going for like full representation and a fully unbiased sample. This is not going to be peer reviewed in any sort of medical academic journal. That's not important, right? What's important is just that you hear from a wide range of people as much as you can. And you know what? If only people who like you can start off, it's better than nothing to start with, I would say. Some people disagree. Some people say no, because then it puts you down false paths. But I think just getting into the habit of routinely having these kind of conversations is better than having full academic rigor, being scared by that and not actually doing it. And then the second part of your question was, what do you ask them? Was that right?
That is correct.
Okay, I'm just checking, because I'm not normally very good at two-part questions. I forget what the second part was. So what do you ask them? So like I said before, you will have a research question, a theme, something you want to find out about. You might have some kind of questions that are kind of general things you want to include, or things that you might think, okay, actually in the future this is going to be useful for me. So I always ask people about their AI usage, what kind of, like, how often they're using AI, what kind of things they're using it for, because in what we do, whenever it's likely that a client is going to need some support in that. So if I can start getting some data, even if that's not the main focus, that's going to be helpful. I always ask about motivations. I start with kind of a warm up question, tell me about yourself at this role, then tell me what you love about your job, because getting people to start talking really kind of warms them up, if you like. They get more confident speaking, and they're more likely to then open up later. So you don't start with like the massive hard ones. You start with really easy questions. I mean, probably the same as a job interview as well. You start with like, tell me about yourself, so someone gets more confident in speaking. You want to be getting frustrations out. So like really dig down to the frustrations. Is there something specific you want to know about? So is it you want to know about attitude to something? Is it you want to know about like how they're using something? Is it you just want to understand the conditions in which they're working? So I've actually got 2 of these calls back to back straight after this. That one, it's working with people who are in their first 30 to, well, it's about the onboarding period, first 2 weeks after they've done an onboarding training to their 90-day check-in. And kind of the area that we're looking at is trying to work out what more can the team do to support people. And they came to me and they're like, oh, can you design these campaigns? And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I don't know anything about these people. I hypothesize that they're super busy. They're not going to read any of your emails because they're like rammed. They're working like, 60-hour weeks from the get-go. They don't have time for this. So what I want to find out is, what have they had to figure out that we could shortcut? So for example, and this is just one person was like, I just really want to know how everyone's like set up their Outlook. So what filters they set up, how they're using color coding in their calendars to help them. All these kind of like little routine stuff. And I can guarantee that no learning team has ever thought, I know, let's put together a training on how to use Outlook. Actually, no, that's not true. They probably have. But, and I haven't come to any synthesis yet, but for example, for that individual, if they had like a quick Teams message saying, oh, this is 3 examples of how people color code their calendars, that individual would have been happy. Now, I don't think that's what I'm going to do, because I think that's probably only very specific to that person. But really, I want to dig down and to understand the realities of their daily life. How many emails are they getting? What do they do with that? How do they decide what they're going to ignore, what they're going to read, what's interesting to them? So you really have to go back to what it is you're trying to achieve, and then your questions very much have to help you get to that answer.
Sorry, I had to interrupt myself there for coughing. So I think the interesting thing there is, one of the pieces of advice you gave was just like, at least just start,
Yeah.
like at least do something, because I think L&D and HR are kind of, especially when it comes to data more broadly, is that Like there's going to be this perfect moment where you have everything you need and everything will align to create the perfect data strategy for your people function, which I think you and I both know that that's not the case. You just have to at
Mm.
least start doing something and make these incremental steps. Um, so when we look at doing user interviews, I think one of the people we work with, they have built user interviews into their monthly cadence. It's a
Hmm.
team of 7 people. They are tasked with doing 3 15-minute interviews every month, and then by the end of the month they get whatever 3 times 7 is, 21. They've done 21 user interviews, and each of those 7 people are doing their own different projects, have different perspectives and all that kind of stuff, but they collectively pool the insight together and now do that as a bring that in from a broader HR team as well. As like, where can I bring in some of this other insight that other people might be bringing in, and now have this like central resource of insight that they can pull from. In that world where you haven't got a specific like requirement that you're interviewing against, what do those what benefit can those conversations have? Or are you just arbitrarily going, oh, let's just have a 15-minute chat and see and shoot the breeze kind of thing?
Okay, yeah, sure. So if you can tap into motivations and frustrations, even if you don't have a very specific use case, then you are getting a lot of gold there. You're getting motivations and frustrations. Pulling all of that insight together then means that you can say, oh, let's have a look. Let's have an explore of our data. What have people said about frustrations in their first 90 days? Or what have people said about frustrations to do with the technology stack that we're using? And you can search it. Obviously, AI is amazing for this, like building all those and these people that we work with, building an insights bank, meaning that all of your data is in one place. Now, it's not necessarily the most rigorous, but it can give you an idea of what you've already got and the gaps that you might have as well. And like I said, we're not trying to do anything. We're not trying to win a award for rigorous methodological statistical studies, right? We're trying to actually have a tangible impact. That's I think that's more important. There's a lot of so on my feed, this annoys me. I'm like in my LinkedIn feed, I've somehow got sucked into an algorithm about AI in qualitative research. I say somehow, I mean it's clearly obvious how this has happened, right? But a lot of people who've worked a long time in this field are very much like, oh no, AI will never replace because AI is no good. Because like also when we said that everybody should do this and then people were bad at it and then it made things harder. I'm like, actually, in our case, in our use case, it's better to have something that is perhaps you've contaminated, perhaps you've led them, perhaps it's not very statistically sound, but you know what? It's getting into the habit and the routine and seeing that this isn't so different. You can improve later, or you can continuously improve your ability to run good interviews, B, do better analysis, and C, create better outputs, but actually just get into the habit and routine of doing it. Having it so that you can refer and say, okay, so what have we got, gives you that solid starting point and understanding of the problem, and then might give you might not need to do anymore. You might already have loads of amazing insight actually that answers your questions. Chances are you'll probably need to top it up with a bit, but that makes this next discovery run shorter, quicker, cheaper.
And well, I think there's two things. Like, it's a more holistic approach, and it's holistic both from, I suppose, that insight is useful to a whole HR or people department, not
Yeah.
just an L&D department.
Oh
If
yeah.
it's an L&D, so regardless of who you are, if your end customer is an employee, that is useful insight. And I think we talked about last week that divorcing L&D and HR is a pretty stupid thing to do,
Mm.
for the reason that in that world that you've just described, well, wouldn't it be better if we had just a better pool of insight and qualitative data that we can pull from to expedite our projects, but also have this more divergent discovery and therefore problem solving that kind of just accidentally gets people to collaborate? Because the other holistic thing is that when you get to the design and delivery and development of something, is that you're then not just doing it in a silo either.
Yeah.
If L&D just goes away and gets some user insight to develop the very best thing for L&D, that is also, for my money, pretty pointless, because there are a whole host of other things. I go back to that project I talked about, right? The cost 30 grand to do a load of human-centered design just to get the recommendations report. A lot of those recommendations were nothing to do with the L&D team that we worked with.
Yep.
But where did those recommendations go? Nowhere. All the recommendations went, well, okay, well, which one of these apply to this project that we're working on? And it went there. So if you do not take a holistic approach to human-centered design and you do it as a function, that's is that is that stupid, or am I just being Toby and being kind of spouting off?
Look, I think you've got to start somewhere, and starting with the people that you can influence within your team is probably a good idea. What you want to be doing is demonstrating the impact and how this is helping you to do your job better, because other people within HR, they also want to do their jobs better. They want to serve the people they're serving, most people. And so knowing actually, oh, you've got this insight, and if they can then use that or say, oh, hey, we found this, we found that, oh, I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example now. I'm making this up. One of the biggest frustrations is that everybody is 2 minutes late to meetings. Well, how about we change our automatic booking things to finish 2 minutes early or 5 minutes early of the previous meeting, so people have got time to get their drinks, go to the bathroom, etc., etc. I'm not saying that's the thing. It's just something small that you could tweak that could make a really big difference. And this is the other thing when we talk with our clients about this. The things that might make everybody's lives easier and better and improve the employee experience could be absolutely free little things that cost you nothing at all. Just one change in a setting on a tool, for example, could make everything so much better for so many people, and that would cost literally nothing.
And I think that's the nice thing about some of the research we get, right? Is that having done a 1 week sprint on doing human centered design and getting loads of insight for an organization based in Dubai and Shanghai,
Mm-hmm.
was like a lot of the recommendations were like, well, some of these you should just do. Like you don't need us to do it. Just go away and change some of these things within your organization. They're not expensive, but I think a lot of the narrative, especially here on LinkedIn, the thought leadership is driven by people who have got something to sell.
Yeah.
We have something to sell, our services, right? But if we look at the world of survey platforms, employee benefits platforms, learning management systems, or learning experience platforms, because apparently they're fundamentally different, debate there. All of these things are created to are really expensive. None of those three things are particularly cheap. Particularly, the more users you have on any of those three given the platforms, the price goes up. And so, if that is your starting point, assuming that one of those three things, sorry, is the thing that you need, or it's going to have the biggest impact, that becomes incredibly hard for a people or HR director to go, we have got a significant return on investment. That's why is it hard? Because if an employee benefits platform costs you £30,000, your people should be generating at least £30,000 more revenue just to break even on that spend.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really difficult to do,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
To even substantiate that. And then actually, if you're going to make the investment, it should actually make more than 30,000 because there is the internal time and resource it takes to even do that. So why so that's what I think the market opportunity there is huge for an L&D or HR team, because imagine if you could do some of that stuff that you did, but you're only really going to get there by doing human centered design, because none of that stuff's really going to come out of a survey. And the interesting thing I think I want to come back to is that you can build this human centered design approach into the working rhythm and routine of what you do, rather than just by doing it on a project by project basis. But if I go back to surveys tend to be, unless you're, our friends at Water, for example, who do bake that kind of methodology into the operating rhythm of the business, are pulse surveys, quarterly, every half a year, every year, we just do that. And yes, that's built into the operating rhythm, but surely that data capture is too far apart and not meaningful enough to make any sense, especially if it's annual.
I don't know. So when we talk about the principles of good data, timely is one of them, right? And timely meaning that it's relatively recent. And so, yes, even if you're doing data kind of over quarterly, it depends the kind of thing you're trying to change. If it's everyone's moaning because you have a no shorts policy, or the aircon's broken and it's 40 degrees, and then you come around to fixing it at Christmas, obviously that's not timely data, right? But then you can start looking at things for a next cycle. So I think it depends whether things go in kind of cycles, performance appraisal time of year might be something that's slightly more useful rather than the weather, but it's sunny, that's what I was thinking of. Having said that, user insights from a couple of years ago could still be valid. It depends if you've had any massive changes in your business. So whenever we do any preparation of interviews, we always what's called segment them. So we put them into like different kind of labels, I guess you'd say. So when was it done? So it's got a date, so we can say actually when we come to look in our insights bank later, exclude anything. We had a big CEO change, so exclude anything from before the CEO change or from 2 months before. Like you can set time limits, and then other segments we will put in there is things like if it's relevant, like team. If you're really interested in finding out things about gender, we might put gender in there, but we tend to avoid it as a default because it makes people too more identifiable. But you can put different kind of tags on it, different segments. But coming back to the timely thing, it doesn't really matter when you do their interviews. If you're doing them kind of continuously, you'll get more insights, you'll find more gaps, you can exclude data out. If you're doing pulse surveys regularly, I don't think how often they are is genuinely the problem. I think it's the type of questions that you ask, the fact that you're so limited. If you ask them more often, you have to ask like, short questions. Do you remember where we used to work? We had to do them like weekly. Do you remember we used to get like a weekly question or maybe weekly 3 questions and they were always different every time? But like, what are you getting out of that? What's helpful? You're just seeing, 20% of people, I don't know, feel like they belong. I hope it's higher than 20. But then what do you do with that? 20% of people don't feel like they belong. They strongly disagree. Shit, what do we do? I don't know, right? And so I think, yeah, if you have a place that, if you have insights that can tell you why people feel that they're not belonging, and then maybe what might make them belong, although be careful asking hypothetical questions because people find it really hard to ask hypothetical questions. This is going to be my other bit of advice. Instead of saying what would make you belong, tell me about somewhere else where you felt like you belonged, because it's easier for people to describe than to like make stuff up or think about what they might need. Yeah.
Okay, so we did originally plan on this episode to go into like the analysis and synthesis of all that information. I don't think we're going to have time to do that. So what I want to kind of wrap up on, we'll call this part 1 because I think clearly there's going to be a part 2. Is like, well, what once you've done all these interviews, what do you do next, kind of thing. But to your point about surveys there and essentially question design, your approach to question design for interviews has to be just as meaningful as it would be for a survey. So what are your top tips for like design? Well, I think there's going to be 2 parts to this question. So
okay, I'll write it down. I got my pencil.
But what are your top tips for like preparing questions for an interview? But also the second bit is then that isn't just what you're going to ask. That isn't how human conversation and in-depth interviews work. You don't just have these set of questions and ask nothing else. You don't just go bullet by bullet and ask all of those things. It's a conversation. You have to react to some of that stuff. So what are the tips to be able to do that as well as create great questions at the beginning?
Okay, so there's kind of 3 bits. My top tips for writing questions is obviously figure out what you're trying to know about. If you don't want to know anything, then think about what might be useful. You want to avoid being leading. Do you think that our CEO is amazing? Do you? You don't want to do it like that. I mean, obviously that's hyped up, hopefully comedic effect, which got absolutely no reaction from Toby there.
I was just wondering. Sorry, I was just playing back. In this relationship, who is the CEO, and therefore how would one respond to that question?
Yeah.
I took myself on a flight of fancy. That's why I had stone.
I see. Okay. So you want to try not to lead people down a particular route because they might, especially if you're in a position of power, feel like they need to give you a certain answer. So, I mean, that's another thing. Think who's going to ask the questions. What's the relationship between this person and other people? Because that will affect the kind of answers you get. Try not to give too much context up front because then people will tell you what they want to hear. I already mentioned try not to be too hypothetical. Don't give people two parts of your questions because it's really hard for them to remember what on earth you're asking about. I also would say your questions out loud before you run it because when I don't do this, I can really tell because the first time I'm like, what the heck does this mean? I wrote this, I've had someone review it, it genuinely still makes no sense to me. I need to come up with a better question.
I think that particularly happens when you get Toby to review the questions and he adapts them and it makes no sense at all.
Possibly. But then when you're actually running, follow the thread, follow the bits that are really interesting. I annotate my questions all the time because I base it on, oh, they said this, so then I want to ask this. I make things bold, saying, right, ask this one next. I'm going to jump. I cross them off when they have answered the question. If we were in person, obviously, I just have a pen and paper and I'm just kind of scribbling all over it. Most of the interviews I run at the moment are on like Teams or Hangout or something. And so I've just got it on the screen and they have absolutely no idea that I'm doing that, which is better in a way because it doesn't throw them off their stride because they feel like making notes. So think about how you can make them as comfortable as possible as well. But and the other thing I would say is, yeah, do not go, okay, I'm going to ask this question. I'm going to ask this question. But at the same time, what you've got to try and do is like be kind of interested, but not add too much of your own spin on it. And not try and reward them for their answers by going, well, that's a great answer, because then it's going to affect what they say. But this is more complicated stuff, I would say. Like if you can try and keep your questions neutral, not leading, try not to have too many hypotheticals, try and get them to describe something they've had and just follow where the conversation's going, I think it's a very good place to start.
Let's do one last question before we wrap up, because, okay, we've done our interviews, we've got loads of great insight, we've got all that kind of stuff. Although I think you kind of mentioned it before, when you get to that situation, you kind of said it as like you can either be someone internally asking employees these questions, or you could be someone externally. So there's that variable, and we've seen that, right? That the quality, not necessarily the quality, but the very different responses you get from an internal to an external person there's quite a big gap there. So why? And it's the same for surveys again, right? Is that anonymity?
Mm-hmm.
Is it because there is, if you're an external and you say it's going to be anonymous, that's really, if it is anonymous, it's not going to go anywhere. Is that why it's better, or why is the external stuff better?
I think it will vary person to person and organization to organization and how like psychologically safe people feel anyway. It does add that sort of level of, oh, I'm very explicit. I ask for consent to record, I explain, and I just transcribe. I don't record the videos. I know you lose some meaning, but that's a whole thing we could go into another time. I think that people do feel slightly safer to be more direct. Sometimes it doesn't hugely matter and make such a difference. You can definitely get good interviews if you're internal, but I think, like I said before, just be cautious of position of power. If you're head of director of C-suite, possible within a small and medium organization, obviously not a large one, then people are gonna like be more cautious about what they tell you. Whereas if someone perhaps more junior is the person running it, then perhaps there's more likely to express what they really feel.
Yeah.
And you
Well,
definitely get that externally too.
based on that, because you have two of these external,
I know, it's 11
running
minutes.
interviews
In 11
minutes. You're running them back to back, and we need to get you time to prepare for that. I think what we'll have to cover in the part 2 of this is understanding, okay, because you alluded to it slightly there, is like, okay, you're having the conversations. How are you documenting the conversation? You kind of covered that, but then we've got to talk about how we enforce that anonymity, and then what you do with all this information afterwards. It's great to have that insight, but you've got to be able to use it in a meaningful way, not just say, hey, I talked to John and John said this, so I think we should do that. That's not how to do it. But that is for another episode of Freeformers Unplugged. I think it's just safe to say that we are coming off the back of a really good week. We were fortunate enough to be at the British HR Awards on Wednesday, where we were nominated for 4. We didn't win any. However, we had so much fun. We had some great fun with the folks over at Jarrell Training, Gressingham Foods. Unfortunately, Galt Foundation couldn't join us because they're based in Oregon, and that is miles away. And the team over at Wix were extremely busy delivering an internal conference, so they couldn't join us. But we had Arian with us, and of course, we had, we were on stage doing stuff with Emma Jamil, who is always a delight to do. So we're going to write up that case study about what that experience was like. For those of you who weren't there, who can, how do you make an engaging 20-minute session at an industry awarding award ceremony. That was the challenge. And I think, Emily, do you think me and Emma managed to do that?
Oh, I think you were engaging. Yeah, no, it was brilliant. It was fantastic. I would say your downfall was the fact that then they started bringing out the wine like halfway through your session. So you did lose some of the edges of the crowd. But yeah, for those who weren't distracted by a nice glass of wine, it was a fantastic event.
Well, and there we go. Glowing feedback. And for those of you at the event, hope you had a great time. Congratulations to all the winners. There were so many cool people in the room, as well as a magician and Lucy Porter, who's just one of the funniest comedians ever.
That's
Anyway,
amazing.
so it was a pleasure to meet her. And also, whilst I remind you, I'm going to do this on a live stream, so there's a social comment. Please, may you send me the picture.
Oh yeah,
You took it
I'll
on
send it
your
now.
phone.
I'll send you now.
That might be the thumbnail picture for this podcast because it'll make no sense. In any case, we will be back. We will be back next week. I'm going to suggest it will be with the part 2 of this conversation because that seems like it would make the most sense to do them back to back. Until then, have an awesome weekend, everybody, and we will see you on the next episode of Freeformers Unplugged. Goodbye.
Bye for now.